Hey folks, welcome back. I'm your host, R.R. Slugger, and in another characteristic fit of morbid fascination, I decided that I wanted to search for the perfect number of visible studs on a LEGO set. Given that you're here right now, I assume you saw the thumbnail on your way in. Indeed, ultimately, I've concluded that the ideal number of visible studs doesn't exist. But I have a feeling this is a predictable deduction for most among us. Besides, I think the journey is far more interesting than the destination on this one. So, what do I mean when I talk about visible studs? Well, as you probably already know, LEGO pieces interlock via a system of studs and anti-studs, held together through the clutch power of the plastic. The idea of visible studs refers to the number of studs remaining on the exterior of a model after construction. By the way, let's not get our terminology confused here. A stud is specifically this part of a LEGO piece. Round 1x1 plates are not supposed to be called studs, despite what every single Traveler's Tale LEGO game has told you. Before the original LEGO Star Wars game, these pieces were more commonly referred to as pips, but I'm not even going to try to cut against the grain on this one. There'd be an immense amount of unlearning needed on a wide scale. Regardless of what you call them, when I talk about studs in this video, I'll be referring to these kind of studs, not these kind of studs. So how should we measure the number of visible studs on a model? Is it just a general head count? Like, do we simply take a model like this, flip it around, and count 1, 2, 3 visible studs? Or is it more of a ratio, potential studs versus visible studs? A car like this one has a similar number of visible studs to the Jedi Starfighter, yet because of its much larger size, it appears even less studded than the previous model. Do studs on the side of a model count towards its total? What about hollow studs? How about visible yet slightly obscured studs? Do anti-studs count? Does viewing angle come into effect? If so, then I'd imagine most any LEGO model will have anti-studs visible somewhere on it. I ask these rhetorical questions to illustrate that there's a reason beyond personal preference as to why I think the perfect number of visible studs just doesn't exist. To the point, I feel the lack of an adequate system of measurement prevents any meaningful objective statement to bear much truth here. More often than not, I find my own preferences to be wildly inconsistent in this category when placed under the microscope. Sometimes I'll find one model too studded for my liking, then be completely at peace with another model that has even more visible studs. Frequently online, I see the idea of visible studs tied to the overall blockiness of a model, but let's interrogate that line of reasoning for a minute. Between these two contemporary sets, the tractor has far more visible studs, yet I'd argue is less blocky compared to the taxi. I think visible studs can contribute to the visual blockiness of a model, but it's far from the only factor. By the way, I don't say any of this as an attempt to debunk straw man arguments or anything like that. These are just observations I've made while working on this video. I'm curious to hear about your views on the matter too. Is this something you've given a lot of thought to before? Another avenue I wanted to explore in this video was the notion that old LEGO sets used to have a ton of visible studs and then were slowly smoothed off over time. There's definitely some truth to this, but I was surprised to find that from my observations, the graph looks a lot more like this. The oldest LEGO sets I own are from 1979. I don't want to go back further than that era here, but visible studs were certainly a mainstay of the 70s and 80s. Even into the early 90s, it seemed like studs were here to stay. However, in only a few short years, the entire aesthetic of LEGO would evolve rapidly. If we look at a model like the Granite Grinder, there really aren't that many visible studs on it. The lack of curves keeps this set from looking modern though, despite many modern sets sharing a similar smoothed off appearance. It's worth noting that sets of this era were still considerably varied. Both of these models released the same year. One of them has studs on nearly every available surface, and the other has nary a trace of them. As we enter the turn of the century, we see that same sort of inconsistency continue, with some sets even containing literally zero visible studs of any kind. The Year of the Plague saw curved elements take over, and all of a sudden we started getting sets that rival modern standards of visible studs. These curves marked the end of LEGO's general blockiness, and I think it's interesting to note that it happened over 20 years ago, much earlier than I think most folks consider. It would take a while for the more advanced building techniques to catch up and for system sets to shed their awkward bionicle parts, but by and large, the sets from the 2010s aren't that dissimilar to what we have today. Even though the swaths of exposed studs found in the models of yesteryear are well behind us, on occasion you'll still find some modern sets that are proud to show them off. And I think that's really neat. Personally, I don't think the lack of visible studs defines modern LEGO. As stated earlier, we've essentially had the same ratio of exposed studs for over 2 decades now. Rather, I find the parts that are being used and how they're being used is a much greater factor. I realize I might just be stating the obvious here, but hopefully you've gleaned at least something insightful from this video. In closing, let's look at one more set in an attempt to answer my original question. What is the perfect number of visible studs on a LEGO set? Of course, this is strictly my opinion and only speaks to my personal preferences, but the model I'd like to highlight here is the original Flash Speeder from 2000. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised at myself for choosing this one, as I only just bought it a few months ago. This is not a childhood favorite set or one skewed by nostalgia, it's just a good model. LEGO sets don't really have size classes the way that Transformers and the like do, but in general, this is my favorite size of a LEGO set. Not the tiny polybag models, not the flagship sets, somewhere in between. In terms of visible studs, I think the Flash Speeder handles this exceptionally well. I feel like any more studs on the front of the hull would have been too many and derogated the sleek form factor. The interior could admittedly use some tiling or grille pieces, but these studs won't be visible once you have minifigures riding within. The rear turret also has a tasteful balance of solid studs and hollow studs paired with some smooth and even curved surfaces. To my eye, the only sections of this model that have potentially too many visible studs are the 2 pods along either side. The 4x4 plates can be a little visually demanding here, but do you want to see a magic trick? Removing them reveals a ton of detail. Honestly, I think running this model without the plates entirely is a viable look, but if you still want to retain the green color scheme and reinforce the structural integrity of the pods, try a couple of 2x4s on for size. Now that's a look I could get behind. Since we're already in the weeds of making alterations to the Flash Speeder anyways, let's address this odd 2x2 by 2/3 gap under the turret. As it just so happens, the LEGO Group recently introduced a mold that fits the bill perfectly. Part 71752 is far and away my favorite modern LEGO piece and deserves its own video at some point. In short, this piece represents something that feels like it has always been a part of the LEGO system, allowing it to seamlessly integrate into models from over 20 years ago, like this one here. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed watching. I'm curious to hear if there's a specific LEGO set you feel has a perfect number of visible studs. Let's search for the answer together. I've been your host, RR Slugger, and I'll see you next time for another video.